Hello, and welcome to the Indy Author Podcast. Today, my guest is Leslie Lefebvre. Hey, Mark, how are you doing?
Hey, Maddie, good to see you again.
It is good to see you too. To give our listeners and viewers a little reminder of your many accomplishments, Mark Lefebvre is the author of more than 20 books that include fiction and thrillers and paranormal nonfiction explorations. He's also edited numerous anthologies. With 3 decades of experience in bookselling and publishing, Mark is a trusted and seasoned book industry professional who embraces both traditional and indie publishing options. And Mark has been a frequent guest. He was in Landmark episode 100, Becoming the Relaxed Author, and he's also been on talking about Wide for the Wind, working with libraries and bookstores, and our collaboration on Taking the Short Tack. And so I invited Mark back to the podcast because he was nice enough to host me recently on a Drafted Digital Self-Publishing Insiders Live to talk about podcasting for authors, and I'll put a link to that conversation in the show notes. And we were chatting afterwards, and the topic of Mark's latest book, Canadian Mounted, came up. And as we talked, I realized I had the completely wrong idea about this book. So, Mark, I wanted to start right out. Yes, for those who are watching on video, Mark is giving you a little visual hint as to what the book is about. But I'm going to just ask you to start out talking about what is Canadian Mounted and how did you come up with the idea?
I'm going to give you a clue, right? I'm going to give you a clue. This is the clue. This is a visual clue, but it'll also be auditory. So if you're just listening to it, it's okay. I know you, don't I? I'm usually pretty good with names, but I'll be damned if I haven't forgotten yours. Or I tried to hail a cab on Park Avenue and you stole it. I've never stolen anything in my life. So this is the dialogue between John Candy and Steve Martin in the movie Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. Classic film, one of my favorite movies of all time. Came out in, 36 years ago, now that we're in 2023, but 35 years ago from when I launched the book, The Canadian Mounted. And the reason I shared that bit of dialogue is that John Candy, Canadian actor, was reading a novel, and in the script by John Hughes, the writer and director, it says he's reading a pornographic novel. And the pornographic novel that John Candy was reading, or Del Griffith was reading, was The Canadian Mounted. And it obviously was a cheeky reference to the fact that Candy was Canadian. It was meant to be a little throwaway prop thing. And I thought it was neat. I was always curious about that. Being a book nerd, every time I see a book in a film, I'm all over it like a cheap suit, right? I'm just really like, what's that book? Where's it from? I've even gone and read books that I found in movies. And then decades later, in one of the Deadpool movies, Wade, Ryan Reynolds, his character, has a book in his hand, and he jokingly says, "I'll be in the bathroom." And when you look at the book that he's holding, it's a slightly different version with this, clantily. So in The Canadian Mounted, there's a woman in a blue bikini, sort of on her hands and knees, like a Spider-Man pose almost on the front of the cover. And it's obviously an adult novel. The Deadpool one, it's a very similar woman in a slightly different, I think it's a green-blue bikini, it's slightly different hair, but it says The Canadian Mounted. And I thought, wait a second, that's the same book. And I was like, is this some sort of, how in movies you use 555 as the exchange for a phone number?
Yep.
So that people don't dial like 8675309, but the people who had that number were getting frustrated. Yep. Back in the 80s, it was a pop song. Look it up if you're not,
if anyone's perplexed.
Not from the older generation. And anyways, I thought it was one of those things. It's like, oh, it's this joking prop thing that people reference in movies because it's an ode to something else. So I thought, wouldn't it be cool to actually make that book for real for the first time? And I thought, okay, God, I'm going to make this book for real for the first time. So I put up a pre-order. I had Juan Pedron, my cover designer. I went and licensed a whole bunch of different images of women in bikinis. And it was like, because I've had done things like this where I license the image, I send it to Juan and go, hey, can you make her hair a different color? Can you make the shirt a different color or whatever? And we kind of Frankensteined a bunch of different models together to make someone who looks something like that. I put up the pre-order and I thought, okay, 2022 is the 35th anniversary of the release of Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. I'm going to release a book of nothing but trivia and anecdotes and behind the scenes, like little things like John Hughes wrote the script in 3 days. It was based on a real life event that had happened to him. He was inspired. He wrote it. Steve Martin, one of the 2 scenes when he read the script that made him want to do the role was the scene where he says the F-bomb 17 times in the space of 1 minute. The marathon car medal scene, for anyone familiar with it, And so I thought this would be cool because this would be a fun passion project. I put it up.
So can I just stop you real
Oh,
quick and ask you a question? Because I think this is the first time I've ever spoken with someone where the cover of the book was the inspiration and the content came later. So did you ever think about other things that you could put as content, or did you immediately go to the trivia idea?
No, I'm glad you asked. Initially, because I've edited so many anthologies, my initial thought was I will do an anthology called The Canadian Mounted. I'm glad you asked that, actually. I'll do an anthology called The Canadian Mounted. And what it will be is it will be a collection. And I thought, well, maybe I'll get Canadian authors, right? So I'll do a call. I want you to write a story, a short story called The Canadian Mounted. It can be any genre except erotica. It cannot be erotica. So the joke was that it would be a whole bunch of short stories in whatever genre you want to try. You want to write romance, mystery, thriller, science fiction, fantasy, contemporary, literary, poetry, whatever, right? Didn't matter what it was. It could not be porn. Could not be erotica. And I was going to release that. And I thought, and then this is actually, Maddie, this is where it came from. And then I'll have a bit of trivia as the introduction or the whatever around it, like related to the movie, and that I thought it would make a real book. Well, having edited numerous anthologies, knowing anthologies never make money anyways, and all the work involved, two things happen at the same time. That reality of publishing, all the work, and then figuring out how do you pay people? I mean, one of the last anthologies I did, I ran a Kickstarter where I raised more than $21,000 and I ended up in the hole after I paid everyone. Yeah, I know. I made $21,000. But I didn't calculate the costs, and I ended up thousands of dollars in the hole on this project because I wanted to pay all the contributors professional rates and all that stuff up front. But one of the other things was, as I was doing trivia and research, I realized more and more that there was way too much content and that would fill a whole book. And so, yeah, that was a great question because, I forgot the fact that my initial thought was, oh, I'm a fiction guy, right? I'll do another anthology.
Yeah, and it's tough. I mean, and we laughed about the fact that when I saw that you were selling a book called Canadian Mounted and I saw the cover design, I thought, "Whoa, Mark's taken a really unexpected turn in his genre choice," because I don't know the movie that well, and it would be tough to put out the call. Like you get a lot of people who would say, an entry for an anthology called Canadian Mounted. All right. And then they would read the rules and they think, they're either going to be not excited to begin with and never even read that they don't have to write erotica, or they'll be excited about it until they read that they can't write erotica.
Yeah. Or I would be getting a lot of penthouse letters, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Exactly.
So I had put the book up for pre-order. It was going to be a trivia book at that point, and I called it the prop book that keeps popping up because I like the play on word. And somebody had contacted me on my website and through a form said, "Hey, I saw that you've got this book and you said it was a prop book, and finally after 35 years it's becoming a real book." And he said, "I want you to know it was a real book. It was published in the 80s. A publisher called Beeline. They did the decades of pornographic novels for adults." And he said this was somebody who had worked in the book industry and somebody who had a podcast about John Hughes called the Pretty in Pink podcast, and had actually shared they had found an old copy of the actual book, scanned it, and made a replica version of the original. And so this is what the original book looked like. You can see that it says Beeline. It's got the little B. I didn't even know when I made my logo, it was the Stark logo because I thought it looked like a little cross or something like that. So I did Stark with the R, which is a quill in it. And I didn't even know it was a B at the time. I didn't know that said Beeline, and the price of the book, $2.50. And it doesn't even, it's written by Michael Flowers, but the name isn't even on the front. There's no barcode on the back. And the text says, "Northern nymph, Anne Marie is sexually very free throughout the land of Canada. Many men have had her. Some are famous, some are shady, but they all admit she's very one horny lady." So that's this is the book that John Candy's character is reading, and you see it in multiple scenes, like at the airport, and even in a cut scene on the plane, where he's reading it. And then he jokes about, he's like, "I travel so much, I've read everything. That's why I'm reading it." So he kind of makes an excuse. Now, on my version of the book, I changed it from Beeline to A Trivia Guide to Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, Stark. And on mine, which does have a barcode, that was the one thing I couldn't get away with, was in tribute. In the movie Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, John Candy is seen holding a paperback that in the original script written by John Hughes reads that Del Griffith is reading a pornographic novel at the airport. That's what inspired this book. And again, I wanted it to look as much like, well, this is a mock-up of the original as possible. And so I found out that this book had been out of print and it had never been registered for copyright. And the publisher actually went bankrupt shortly after publishing the book. They actually went out of business. This may have been one of the last books they ever published. And it's kind of funny because they published thousands. They were kind of like the Harlequin of erotic novels back in the day. And you go through in some used bookstores or even online, you'll see Beeline they did a lot of stuff, right? And Michael Flowers was not probably the author's real name. It was probably a pseudonym of write for hire kind of work that you just like, hey, I'm going to get like $1,000 to write a novel or whatever it was, pulp fiction kind of stuff. So yeah, and again, I did everything I could. The spine, obviously the spine's as much as identical as possible. I even, although I did put the Stark logo on the back, I made it exactly 192 pages like the original, which meant I had to cut some stuff just to make it. So what I wanted was I wanted to have a perfect replica, so that one of the cheeky things is marketing is hashtag reading Canadian Mounted, and having people who picked up the book pose with the book at an airport, take a picture of themselves reading it at an airport. And some people I've even seen in reviews on Amazon said, I bought this for my uncle because he wants to just take it to airports and read it. Because if you see someone reading the book, you're going to think one of two things. It's kind of like me and my skeleton. When you see me with my skeleton at a book signing, you either want to avoid contact with the crazy bald guy, or you go, oh my God, that's my jam. I want to go check out what he writes. Same thing with this book. You either think, oh, there's a dirty old man, or oh my God, that's from the movie Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. So the real diehard fans, the real fans will pick up on it. Anyways, that's it. And it's kind of a weird sort of, it's very niche when you think of it that way, even though millions and millions of people know this movie.
Well, we're going to come at some point to how it's done once it's out there. But I'm very intrigued by the idea of the fact that you were able to do some of this stuff because the actual Beeline book had never been registered for copyright, and how you went about finding the materials and making sure that you were using them in a permissible way for the book.
Yeah, so that was tricky. It was tricky because there are different sites where you can purchase, like Alamy, where you can purchase the rights to use images from films and stuff like that. So there's a picture in the book of John Candy holding the book on the plane, which was actually cut from the release of the movie, the theatrical release of the movie. It was brought back in a scene just this year. And I didn't actually see, like, I've seen the picture online and it's available to purchase, but it was never in even the cut scenes of all the special. I have like 5 different versions of the DVD and Blu-ray with director commentary and stuff, because that was part of the research. But that image from John Candy, I was able to pay for using it inside a book. But to use an image like that on the cover of the book, usually they say you have to contact the film studio because it's going to cost thousands of dollars probably, as opposed to hundreds.
Well, that's an interesting distinction. How were you able to feel confident that Alamy had the rights they needed to sell you the photograph that was used in the inside of the book?
Only because I know other people, authors who've purchased rights from Alamy, and publishers as well that have used Alamy. So I felt confident that I'm good with terms of using it interior. I wouldn't be comfortable using it as the exterior, because obviously that's a completely different, it's a weird sort of rule that they have.
Yeah, it surprises me that there would be completely different rules about interior versus cover. Thinking about it now, it makes sense, but I'm not sure that would have occurred to me right off the bat.
Well, the interior, when you think of the interior of a book, most of the interior of the book's hidden to the general public, right? Yeah. So it's protected. The covers are visible everywhere. The thumbnails, everything, right?
And you'd have to accommodate the fact that people who are writing books about a topic are going to want to draw pictures as part of their research, as part of their content, as part of the argument they're making or the experience they're providing. So if I'm writing a book about the Civil War and I can find a picture of Lincoln supposedly on the platform at Gettysburg, then it would be prohibitive if I had to pay thousands of dollars. If each author who's writing that book had to pay thousands of dollars in order to reproduce that photograph.
Yeah. And I mean, the other thing too is I found two different versions. There's probably 30 different versions of the script that John Hughes wrote, but I found PDF scans of two different versions of the final shooting script. I have a copy of in PDF, and then a script from 6 months earlier or 7 months earlier. And I use those for research. And this is tricky because, I mean, I'm not going to recreate the scripts inside the book, as that would be a violation. But, you know, in that fair use where I'm doing critique and criticism, I used pieces of the script to illustrate certain things, like Dellism. So Del Griffith says, you'll have more trouble getting a flight out of here than finding a three-legged ballerina. And if they said Wolverines would make good house pets, would you believe them? So there's all these Dellisms in the movie, but there's even more in the script. And so what I did is I have a chapter on Dellisms, and then I went into the script and found other Dellisms that never made it into the script. And I used those little snippets. And there's even a subplot, which is kind of there in the movie, where Neil Page, Steve Martin's character, is on the road too much, and his wife thinks he's having an affair. And so there's something in their past where she may have suspected he was having an affair. So she thinks Dell is a nickname for some woman he's with. And so there's this whole underlying subplot where you even see her talking to her mom because the family's coming for Thanksgiving, talking about, like, is Neil being unfaithful to me, and like all this stuff. So I even have a chapter about the missing subplot because I think the original film would have been 6 hours.
Yeah.
They had to cut it. I think they cut down the original to 3 hours. They did a screening in front of an audience, and then they cut it to 1 hour and 36 minutes.
Yeah. 3 hours would be a lot.
A little much. But it's amazing how much they filmed. So when you think about it, like, John Hughes had this script that was twice the length of most scripts, or 3 times the length of most Hollywood scripts based on page count. And then he filmed like 6 hours worth of stuff. And then it was the masterful job of editing it down. And so, I mean, I guess because I've done so much research and I've read so many interviews with people who worked with John Hughes on this and all of the background, I mean, it's just been an amazing experience of learning just how incredible. And yeah, I got the special feature DVD that came out last year that has an extra hour of cut scenes, and they're really neat. But I'm so glad they didn't make it into the film, because you can see why they're there. It's kind of cool, but the way that they did it was perfect.
Yeah. After this, the homework assignment is Planes, Trains, and Automobiles as craft master class.
Yeah. No kidding.
Two things I want to talk about. We've talked a lot about what you had to do to create a book that looked very much like the book that was in the movie. And it sounds like you did most of that work yourself. Is that true?
Initially I did use my cover designer, but then I ended up so I went in, used a scan of the original, went into Photoshop, and I actually had, because it was all wrinkly and cracked and everything. So I had to clean up, like clean old photographs. So I went through all of those processes, and then I had to change things. I had to purchase the font so I could use the font. And it's not the exact font that was on the original, but it's as close, because again, I spent hours trying to find the right one. But yeah, I did all of that myself. But normally I would use a cover designer, but this was a special project.
Yeah, this isn't really cover design. It's cover reproduction or something like that.
It's spoof. It's parody.
Yeah.
Basically.
Well, I actually have a very specific question. That how did you find the font? Can you use like Google Lens or Image or something like that? How did you figure out what it was?
There's an app called Find My Font, and there's another one like that.
Oh,
and what happens is you take your phone, you scan it over a font, and I usually do several passes because you try different sections of letters. It opens it up, and then based on certain letters, it takes you to, and obviously they have an affiliate relationship. So when you buy a font, they probably get a cut. And I think I purchased 2 or 3 different fonts through that. So again, I mean, it's not, I spent money on these things, and like, oh, look, I found a font online and I used it. No, I'm in very much of the mind of, if I'm going to use something as a professional, I better pay for it to make sure that the people who've created these things get their due for it.
So unlike many of your books, I'm guessing, I think that you're probably selling more in print than in ebook. Am I right in assuming that? Because the whole idea, I think, it would be like as a gift or.
Yeah. And this is, well, I mean, with several of my traditionally published books, my true ghost story books, I sell print because people
Okay.
want the artifact. They go on a ghost walk of the
Yeah.
nation's capital,
Yeah.
and then they want to buy the creepy capital. They want to buy the book to have it. They want to buy Haunted Hamilton. They want to buy Haunted Hospitals. And so they sell really well in print. They don't sell an ebook. That's fine. Who cares? The Canadian Mounted is very much, it's a stocking stuffer. It fits perfectly in a Christmas stocking. It is a gift. It's definitely a gift. So I figured I would sell a lot between American Thanksgiving. I launched at Canadian Thanksgiving, give it sort of a runway so I could get some people out in the wild with pictures of themselves reading it. So other people can go, where'd you get that? And so it was mostly print. It was mostly print. I think I've maybe sold, maybe by now, maybe 120 copies in ebook. Maybe that's it, of copies in print. And the other thing I did that indie authors typically don't do is indie authors typically price their books so low so that they can sell more and make a little bit of margin. Well, print books cost money. And I set it so that I was making $5 per unit. So
Nice.
even though it's a tiny paperback, it's $12.99 US, $17.99 Canadian. It's kind of like, if you want it, you want it. If you
Yeah.
don't want it, you don't want it. And I wasn't going for I'm only going to make 5-cent margin so I can
Yeah.
sell more, right? I wasn't playing that game. I was playing this game as if you want the book, you want the book. It's worth $12.99 to you or it's not. And holy crap, it's worth $12.99 to a lot of people.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well,
it's
how
still selling this month in January of 2023, even though Christmas is over. And it's just, and again, it's not selling in the huge daily volumes that it was before. And Liz keeps telling me to stop looking at my dashboard, but it's kind of like I can't help it. It's like
but the
people keep
holidays come
buying,
up every year.
people keep buying it. So I look at this
Yeah.
and think, well, this will be a perennial. It'll probably, because to be quite honest, I may have sold it to a few thousand people, but there are millions of people out there
Yeah.
that are still. So it seems like, nah, you tapped into the market. No, I barely scratched it.
Well, how
Barely
do you
scratched the
find
surface.
those? Because this is a very specific, I mean, I think a lot of
Yeah.
authors struggle to figure out exactly who their target audience is. You pretty
Mm.
much know exactly who your target audience is. All the
I find
people
that.
who
Yeah.
really love planes, trains, and automobiles, or I
Yeah.
suppose John Candy or John Hughes or
Yeah.
Steve Martin. So, how are you going about finding that target audience?
Yeah. Great question. Great question. So one of the earliest things I did is I sent Ryan Reynolds' manager 10 copies because I know Ryan Reynolds is a huge fan of John Candy. And oh, by the way, and I managed to get this into the book in May of 2021 or 2022, May of the last couple of years. He was on David Letterman's new show, My Guest Needs No Introduction. And he talked about having the prop team make a mock book as a nod to John Candy because he loved John Candy. And he's doing a tribute movie about John Candy. And I thought, well, before he does the next Deadpool, why doesn't he just use this book? So I sent his manager 10 back in October. And I actually had his manager's address because he won an Aurora Award, and I've been hosting the Aurora Awards for the last couple of years. So I'm a member of that committee. And so we had to have Ryan's address or his manager's address to send him the award he won for one of his films. Might have been Free Guy or something because the director was Canadian and Ryan was executive producer. In any case, I had never heard back. I just thought it'd be kind of cool if Ryan Reynolds waves this book and says, hey, cool, Mark Leslie has a book. That would have been, even just waving the book, not saying anything about it, would have driven tens of thousands of people to go searching for it. I did see Jennifer Candy, John Candy's daughter. Someone sent her a copy of it. So on Instagram, just a couple of weeks ago, there's a picture of her holding it up. And I was
Oh,
like, oh
what
my God,
fun.
Jennifer Candy. That's so
Yeah.
sweet. So awesome. And she has her own little cool called The Couch Candy. It's a really cool interview show she's doing. Really, she's a great interviewer. She's a lot of fun. Um, anyways, I found some groups, Long Live John Candy. So obviously a lot of people are fans of John Candy and all of his films. So they're their target audience. I did some Amazon ads where I was targeting people who were searching for the movie, and it worked out really well because it was the 35th anniversary of the film. They had that special Blu-ray H4K edition of the special deleted scenes, an hour of deleted scenes. It was the first time that these scenes have ever been available, and they're really grainy and just, it's kind of like some like an old VHS kind of tape. Um, and so I targeted people who were looking at the movie. And then there's even a game. And I bought it for my son for Christmas this year as a stocking stuffer. It's a card game, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles as well. So anyone looking at card game, they had to be a big enough fan that they would want a game based on the movie. and anyone looking at any of the versions of the movie that were available. And that's how I targeted on Amazon. Yeah, and I did send out press releases to media, like just to see if any, but nobody picked up on the story. My publicist, Mickey Mickelson, also sent a press release out to a bunch of markets. I was interviewed on a few podcasts, but would have been kind of cool around Thanksgiving to say, and Canadian author Mark Leslie as a tribute to Canadian actor John Candy's 35th anniversary. Like, I think it's an interesting story.
Well, the 35th anniversary is cool, but it is the kind of thing that somebody might not have picked it up when that press release went out, but it's the kind of thing that you can be promoting every holiday season at a minimum. And
of course.
The story might get picked up if the story's kind of timeless. So
maybe the 40th. No, so here's the thing.
Maybe the 40th, yeah.
Yeah, maybe in the 40th anniversary of the movie's release, I mean, people will still be buying it, right?
Yeah.
And so that's led to my desire to go, oh, you know what? I had so much fun writing about a movie I loved. And so here's the thing. I found another trivia book called Those Aren't Pillows by Tracy Morgan, I think. Not the actor Tracy Morgan, but a female Tracy Morgan. I bought 2 books from Tracy Morgan, which was a biography of John Candy, which I ended up using a few snippets from in some of the content because they talked about Candy being an amazing guy and some of the stuff related to the film. And then that trivia guide.
I just had to show you this because look what's showing up under.
Oh yeah, when you
front and
customers
center.
who viewed this, yes, they viewed the movie, they viewed my book, and then they
Your
viewed
book?
Tracy Morgan's book.
Yep.
Yeah. So yeah, I used Tracy's books and I referred to them. Like the other thing too is there was a few books about John Hughes and John Candy that I purchased and read. Well, I didn't read the whole thing. I read snippets to get the source. And I have that as referred reading at the end. So at the end of the book, there's the link to, hey, here's these books. You should go check them out too. So I'm hoping to help support the people who provided me content for it. So that's
so another movie tribute sort of thing is in your future or maybe in the works.
Yeah. So I mean, I have a few different ideas because there's several movies I've loved. Like Life of Brian from Monty Python is one of the ones that, the 40th anniversary, Liz and my son Alexander and I went to see it, and we went in and they had little fake beards for women. We weren't allowed to go to Stoney's End, so it was kind of like this weird. So these little packages and stuff. Liz and I have gone to a speak along showing of Life of Brian. One of my favorite. My 50th birthday, we had a Life of Mark theme party. So that's probably coming up. But that was the 40th was when I turned 50. So maybe I do the 50th, but that's a few years from now. But I'm doing Die Hard, and two of the reasons I'm doing it is, I mean, I watch Die Hard at least once every year. Christmas time is a great Christmas film. I've enjoyed the entire franchise, not so much. I've read the books that the movies are based on. Nothing Lasts Forever by Roderick Thorpe, which has this whole interesting story of how Frank Sinatra, it was in the contract that he was supposed to play the character Die Hard because he played in a movie called The Detective, and Nothing Lasts Forever was a sequel to The Detective by Roderick Thorpe. So there's this whole legacy related to book nerdish stuff. Anyway, John McClane was completely fabricated based on Joe Leland, which was the original character, and they changed him and stuff like that. I've bought graphic novels from the franchise and a great book called Why We Love Die Hard. It's a great, beautiful hardcover book with amazing art. And so I'll be releasing that in July of 2023. It's up for pre-order. It's called Yippee-Ki-Yay Mother Bleeper, which is the catchphrase John McClane uses. I have a cover artist, Nicolette Jones, who I've worked with before. She's an artist. She's going to do the artwork for the cover. Now, again, I tried to find an image like Bruce Willis with the gun, the white t-shirt and stuff like that, running through the buildings or whatever. And I was able to secure rights to use images in the book, which I probably will, but I was not able to. And I even contacted the studio, I think it was 20th Century Fox, now owned by Disney or whatever. And they said no. I actually reached out to a few people and say, hey, I'm looking for the rights to use this for the cover. And they're like, no. But I did purchase the rights for some interior artwork, but I'm having Nicolette doing like an image that's very suggestive of what it is. With the white t-shirt with the blood and stuff like that, but not necessarily an image of Bruce Willis. And so that'll be coming out on the 35th anniversary of the theatrical release of Die Hard, which was a summer blockbuster when it was first released.
Well, it's interesting. I think that the thing that is so intriguing about Canadian Mounted is the fact that it is a book based on a book in a movie. And I was thinking you could get in a lot of trouble by doing the Bible for Life of Brian. You could make it look like a Bible, but it would be trivia. But
well, they get in trouble the way they got in trouble.
Yeah. It would all play out in real life.
That's a great idea.
But it is interesting to think of, like, you could just scan everybody's favorite movies, and you must be always looking for books and movies, right? Like, I don't know, Citizen Kane. If Citizen Kane's ever reading a book, then you could do a book that looks like that.
Yeah. Well, I didn't want to pigeonhole myself into that. What I wanted to do was go with something I've watched hundreds of times already, read about, just absorbed and loved. Anyone can do a trivia book about a movie. You just research and you write it. But I put myself in here. I mean, in the introduction, I talk about how this movie has impacted my life personally, how one of my dearest friends who I've co-authored books with lately, how one of the first times we met, we bonded over quoting from the movie. How my son and I got trapped on the highway in 2020 in our vehicle broke down, and we took a picture of ourselves sitting on not a trunk, not Del Griffith's trunk, but on the cooler with a whole bunch of the stuff while we were waiting for Liz to come pick us up. Like, we're 4 hours away on the highway. And I took a picture that looks like them outside the Braidwood Inn, which you see the two of them sitting there outside waiting and joking with my son. We're gonna laugh about this one day. And he's like, Dad, this is kind of like planes, trains, and automobiles. I still haven't gotten to where we wanted to go. And so I put a lot of personal reflections in the book. And I think that fans appreciate that it's not just a bullet point blow by blow, but that I've actually put in my own love. And I think that authenticity helps them feel, oh, someone like me, rather than some guy who just wrote a bunch of bullet points about a movie that he could get from watching special features. I think that made a difference.
Yeah. That's so cool. That is such a fun story to hear, Mark. And I suspect that many of the listeners are going to want to go find this. So where can they go to find out more about Canadian Mounted and about you?
Well, they can go to books2read.com/The Canadian Mounted and find links to it on all the retailers. They're probably going to want to look for the print version, which is available on most of the major platforms. And then you can find out more about me at markleslie.ca.
Great. Thank you so much, Mark.
Thanks, Maddie.